Welcome to True Crime Threads. A deadly affair, a shocking murder, this is the story. Gladys, a 32-year-old secretary at an esteemed private investigation firm, was known for her professionalism and charm. With her meticulous attention to detail and friendly demeanor, she had become an indispensable part of the office. Among her colleagues, her work ethic stood out, but so did her ability to disarm even the most intense personalities. She was a trusted confidant and a sharp organizer, ensuring the firm ran smoothly. Kevin, the head investigator and her boss, had always been impressed by her capabilities. In his early 40s, Kevin was a seasoned professional with a sharp mind and a commanding presence. To outsiders, he had a perfect life, a thriving career, a beautiful wife, and 2 children. Yet, beneath the surface, Kevin's personal life was far from ideal. Struggles in his marriage left him feeling restless, and he often sought solace in his work. His growing admiration for Gladys eventually became more than professional respect. It started innocently, with late-night discussions about cases and shared cups of coffee in the quiet office. Gladys admired Kevin's intellect and confidence, and she couldn't ignore the chemistry between them. What began as subtle glances and lingering conversations quickly escalated into a passionate, clandestine affair. The secrecy of their relationship heightened the thrill, and they found excuses to spend more time together, both inside and outside the office. Kevin knew the risks involved. He had much to lose if their affair were discovered: his marriage, his reputation, and potentially his career. But the allure of being with Gladys proved too strong to resist. Gladys, on the other hand, struggled with the moral implications of their relationship. She knew what they were doing was wrong, yet she couldn't pull herself away from Kevin's charm. Each stolen moment came with a mix of excitement and guilt. Unbeknownst to them, their connection hadn't gone unnoticed. Don, one of Kevin's colleagues, had been growing suspicious for weeks. In his late 30s, Don had always harbored resentment toward Kevin, envying his success and authority in the firm. Don had noticed subtle changes in their interactions: shared looks, whispers, and Gladys's frequent late-night presence at the office. Driven by jealousy and an innate need to uncover secrets, Don began observing them more closely. When Kevin and Gladys thought they were being careful, Don was already piecing together the truth. He started following Kevin after hours and eventually caught glimpses of their private rendezvous. Fueled by his envy of Kevin and his growing fixation on Gladys, Don made it his mission to expose their affair. His discovery would set in motion a chain of events neither Kevin nor Gladys could predict, leading to devastating consequences. Don's suspicions about Kevin and Gladys deepened with every passing day. As someone who prided himself on his observational skills, he found the subtle signs impossible to ignore. He began to notice how Kevin's eyes lingered on Gladys during meetings, the way they often disappeared together after hours, and their casual yet oddly personal conversations that seemed out of place in a professional setting. For Don, it was no longer a question of if something was happening between them, but when it started. His suspicions were finally confirmed when he followed Kevin to a nearby restaurant one evening. What he witnessed left no room for doubt: Kevin and Gladys sitting in a private booth, their body language revealing far more than words ever could. Don discreetly snapped photos of the pair, knowing that this evidence could serve as his ultimate weapon. He didn't just want to expose Kevin, he wanted to bring him down. But Don's motives weren't purely professional. Over time, he had developed a fixation on Gladys. She was everything he admired: intelligent, poised, and seemingly unattainable. In his mind, Kevin didn't deserve her, and he resented him all the more for what he perceived as an abuse of power. Don began convincing himself that Gladys would be better off with someone like him, someone who could truly appreciate her. Gladys, however, remained blissfully unaware of Don's growing obsession. She was already grappling with her own guilt and uncertainty. While she was drawn to Kevin's confidence and charisma, she also felt trapped by the secrecy and the weight of their affair. The thrill of their relationship was fading, replaced by the gnawing fear of discovery and the realization that Kevin's promises to leave his wife might never come to fruition. One day, Don decided to confront Gladys directly. He waited until she was alone in the office and approached her with the photos he had taken. He revealed his knowledge of the affair and expressed his feelings for her, painting himself as a better choice. But his actions only terrified Gladys. She quickly rejected him, warning him to stay away from her and Kevin. Don's humiliation and rejection turned his obsession into anger. Meanwhile, Kevin remained oblivious to the brewing storm. He continued his double life, unaware that his secrets were no longer safe. Gladys, shaken by Don's confrontation, began to fear for her safety but didn't dare to tell Kevin. Don's betrayal and unreciprocated feelings pushed him further into darkness, setting the stage for the tragedy that was about to unfold. Don's humiliation after Gladys rejected him festered into a toxic mix of anger and obsession. What had started as infatuation turned into a dangerous fixation. The photos he had taken of Kevin and Gladys became his leverage, and he was determined to use them to destroy Kevin's life. Late one night, after drinking heavily, Don made a decision that would change everything. He anonymously sent the incriminating photos to Kevin's wife, knowing the chaos it would unleash. The revelation shattered Kevin's seemingly perfect family life. His wife, devastated by the betrayal, confronted him immediately. The argument escalated, and within days she filed for divorce, taking their 2 children with her. Kevin's personal life unraveled, and the stress began to affect his work. Rumors spread quickly within the firm as Kevin's distracted behavior became noticeable, and soon whispers about the affair circulated among colleagues. Kevin's anger and frustration grew, but instead of taking responsibility, he directed his blame at Gladys. He accused her of being careless, of somehow allowing the affair to be exposed. Gladys, already burdened by guilt and fear, felt abandoned. The man she had risked everything for now treated her as if she were the sole reason for his downfall. Meanwhile, Don's obsession deepened. Seeing Kevin's life crumble gave him a twisted sense of satisfaction, but it wasn't enough. His fixation on Gladys only grew more intense. He began to follow her outside of work, watching her every move. She started noticing signs, footsteps behind her on quiet streets, shadows lingering near her apartment building. She felt the weight of his presence but didn't know how to prove it or who to turn to. Desperate, Gladys reached out to Kevin for help. She confided in him about her fears, telling him she suspected Don was stalking her. But Kevin, consumed by his own misery, brushed off her concerns. He dismissed Don's behavior as harmless, leaving Gladys feeling more isolated than ever. As her anxiety mounted, Gladys considered quitting her job to escape the toxic environment. She had begun drafting a resignation letter, hoping to start fresh elsewhere. However, before she could take action, the unthinkable happened. One evening, after finishing a late shift at the office, Gladys vanished. Her roommate reported her missing the following morning, sparking a frantic search. Days later, her lifeless body was discovered in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. She had been brutally murdered, and the discovery sent shockwaves through the community. The police immediately launched an investigation, and attention turned to the 2 men who had been central to her life in recent months, Kevin and Don. Both had motives, and both had secrets. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, it became clear that the truth behind Gladys's death was far darker than anyone could have imagined. The discovery of Gladys's body sent shockwaves through the investigation firm and the surrounding community. Her brutal murder quickly became a high-profile case, with detectives racing to identify her killer. Suspicion immediately fell on the 2 men most closely tied to her in recent months, Kevin and Don. Both men had motives, and both had secrets they were desperate to keep hidden. Kevin, reeling from the implosion of his personal and professional life, was the first to come under scrutiny. Witnesses came forward, recalling arguments between him and Gladys that had taken place in the weeks leading up to her death. Some colleagues reported seeing Kevin act unusually aggressive and distracted, and others mentioned Gladys appearing tense whenever he was nearby. When detectives questioned him, Kevin admitted to the affair but vehemently denied any involvement in her murder. However, the evidence against him seemed damning. Forensic analysis of Gladys's belongings revealed traces of Kevin's fingerprints on a notebook she was carrying, and her phone records indicated several calls and messages exchanged between them shortly before her disappearance. Investigators theorized that Kevin, facing the collapse of his marriage and career, might have lashed out in a moment of rage. Meanwhile, Don was also firmly in the spotlight. Gladys had confided in a close friend about feeling unsafe due to Don's behavior. She had mentioned his confrontational approach, his stalking, and his disturbing obsession with her. When police searched Don's apartment, they found a collection of photos of Gladys, including candid shots taken without her knowledge. Even more unsettling were the handwritten letters expressing his love for her and his anger over her rejection. Don's behavior in the days following Gladys's disappearance further raised red flags. He had been avoiding work, and neighbors reported seeing him pacing outside his building late at night. Surveillance footage from a gas station near the abandoned warehouse placed Don in the area around the time of the murder. Adding to the growing evidence, fibers from Don's jacket matched those found on Gladys's body. Despite the mounting case against him, Don maintained his innocence. He admitted to being in the vicinity of the warehouse but claimed it was purely coincidental. He also alleged that Kevin was framing him to cover his own tracks. The rivalry between the two men, already toxic, now became the centerpiece of the investigation. Each man painted the other as the likely murderer, complicating the case further. As detectives pieced together timelines and motives, the case seemed to be leading to Don as the prime suspect. But the investigation was far from straightforward. The deeper detectives dug, the more inconsistencies they uncovered, leaving everyone wondering whether the truth had truly come to light or if the real killer was still hiding in plain sight. As the case against Don appeared to solidify, new evidence emerged that cast doubt on the investigation's conclusions. Forensic analysts re-examined Gladys's phone and discovered a deleted message she had sent to Kevin just hours before her death. The message read, "Don is following me." I'm scared this revelation added a critical layer of complexity to the case, suggesting that Gladys herself had feared Don in her final hours. When confronted with the message, Kevin admitted to receiving it but claimed he hadn't taken it seriously at the time. He explained that his life had been in turmoil, and he assumed Gladys was exaggerating. Kevin's failure to act, however, painted him in a more suspicious light. Detectives began to wonder if his neglect stemmed from guilt or indifference, both potential signs of involvement. Simultaneously, a key witness came forward. A janitor working near the abandoned warehouse reported seeing Don on the night of the murder. He described Don dragging what appeared to be a large object wrapped in cloth toward the building. This testimony, combined with the physical evidence tying Don to the crime scene, made it increasingly difficult for him to maintain his innocence. Despite this, Don continued to insist that Kevin was the real killer. He claimed that Kevin, angry and desperate after losing his family, had lashed out at Gladys and then manipulated the evidence to frame him. Don pointed to Kevin's history of controlling behavior and the aggressive arguments between him and Gladys as proof of his theory. The trial that followed was tense and widely publicized, with the prosecution presenting a strong case against Don. They detailed his obsession with Gladys, his stalking behavior, and the forensic evidence that placed him at the crime scene. The defense, however, attempted to shift blame onto Kevin, highlighting his motive, his failure to respond to Gladys's message, and the personal turmoil he was experiencing at the time. In the end, the jury found Don guilty of Gladys's murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Don maintained his innocence, but the weight of the evidence against him was overwhelming. The case left a bitter aftertaste for all involved, with lingering questions about Kevin's role in the events leading up to Gladys's death. The tragedy cast a long shadow over the investigation firm. Kevin resigned shortly after the trial, unable to recover from the public scrutiny and his own guilt for not protecting Gladys. The story of Gladys's murder became a cautionary tale about obsession, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of unchecked emotions. Though justice was served, the lives shattered by the events could never be repaired. The truth behind every choice made, every secret kept, and every action taken lingered, leaving an indelible mark on everyone connected to Gladys's story.